It's going to be helpful for me to know who was here 2 weeks ago for the first part of this conversation. So Jackie's going to launch a poll right now. And if you can just quickly, and if you're on your phone and you can't access the poll, that's okay. Don't worry about it. I just want to get a general feel for how many people are here versus not here. So I know just kind of how much context we have. So we've got 60%. The polls are reporting 60%. So we'll leave it for maybe, I don't know, 30 more seconds here if you didn't get a chance to weigh in. Looks like some people are still voting. Great participation, 75% already. All right, looks like it's slowing down. I'm going to go ahead and end that poll if you all are curious. It looks like almost 80% of you were here for part one, and about 22% of you were not here, which is great. I forgot to share the results. That's what I meant to show you. We did record the last session, so if you want to go back and watch it, please feel free to do that. But we will jump in. Let me stop sharing that. Just a moment here. We'll jump in and build from that conversation. So if you feel like you're missing a little bit of context, you can go back and watch that conversation. I'm not going to give my full background again, but just for those of you who weren't here, my name is Genevieve Thomas, and I am the Director of Professional Learning with School Services of Montana. We're a small nonprofit ed services organization. We do serve almost every district in the state of Montana in one capacity or another. My background's in special education, so I'm a former special education teacher and dyslexia specialist and school psychologist, and I'm currently a doctoral student in the reading science program at Mount St. Joseph University. So that's a little bit about who I am. I also am going to ask you all for potentially a little bit of grace tonight. I was telling Jackie I adopted a puppy last weekend, which was really fun, but he is definitely being busy right now. So if you hear any little tiny puppy yips, we're not encouraging that behavior. We're just gonna ignore it. All right, friends. So let's go ahead and keep rolling. I do want to share just a few logistics. So Jackie shared in the chat box a session handout. So this has our objectives for today. It has a PDF of the slides, so don't feel like you have to take furious notes. You have those. It has my contact information if you have any follow-up questions, and it has a lot of resources for continued learning. A lot of those are actually similar to what I shared last time, but if your interest is piqued and you want to learn more, I shared some books and some websites and some podcasts, so I'll encourage you to dig in there. As questions are coming up, I'll ask you to park those in the chat box. I can't multitask for a hill of beans, so I do not look at the chat box while I'm presenting, but I have some time for Q&A towards the end, and we can probably do some Q&A before we go into breakouts as well. So just park them there. If Jackie can answer them, she'll answer them. Otherwise, we'll make some space to answer those. And in terms of videos, I always love seeing your faces. I trust that you all look fabulous either way. We are going to have some small group breakout conversations towards the end. That was a request after our last session. So even if you want to have your video off for this whole group conversation, I will encourage you to have it on when you have those smaller group conversations with your colleagues towards the end. I think that is all the logistics, friends. I think we are ready to jump into our content here. And what I want to start with, so if you were with me in the last session, we started a little bit by talking about what really is Montana House Bill 352 that was passed in 2023. We know that this series that the OPI is sponsoring is really designed to help schools implementing some of the programs that filtered out from this legislation. So before I do my big reveal here, if you were with me last time, or just if you know about the House bill, I want you to think about what was really the big intention. Besides all of the logistics and specifics, why was this bill written? What's the goal? So you might recall that the ultimate goal of the bill is around increasing third grade reading proficiency rates. So we really think about this as an early childhood program and support for early childhood programs, which it is. There's a lot of support there. because we know that's our best place, our most efficient place to shore up language and literacy skills. But really, this is our North Star. This is what we're after with these programs that we're building as a result of House Bill 352, is increasing reading proficiency rates for our third grade students. A little bit more context setting from our last conversation. We talked a little bit about an article that was written and then revised by Dr. Louisa Moats, where she really outlines a framework for, if we're going to do this work, if we're going to improve reading outcomes for students in our schools, in our state, in our country, what do teachers need to know and be able to do? And in our last conversation, we really focused on these two bullets. We talked a lot about the basics of reading psychology and development. We talked about how phonemic and awareness ends up leading to reading proficiency. And we talked about some of those language structure pieces. There was a request for more on that, so we have a surprise to share with you at the end. But that's what we talked about last time. So if you weren't with us and that piques your interest, I'll encourage you to go watch the recording. Today, we're really going to talk about instructional best practices. I did say last time we were going to talk about assessments as well, and then I went to build out the session, and I was like, well, an hour is not enough time to talk about both of those things. So we're not going to talk about assessment today, but we are going to talk about instruction, which I'm guessing is probably what folks are most interested in. So this is a roadmap for our time together. These are our learning targets as well as our agenda. If you were here last time, you know that I try to make even my virtual sessions interactive. And so if I'm reading something, I'm going to read the purple. I'm going to encourage you to read the orange bold stuff along with me so that you can have some active choral participation here. Don't take yourself off mute. You're going to do this quietly to yourself. So I'm going to read our learning targets. I'll encourage you to read the orange parts with me. So our first learning target is I can summarize the research describing evidence-based instruction for building phonological and phonemic awareness. Our second learning target is I can observe instructional routines for building phonemic and phonological awareness and evaluate their alignment with evidence-based instruction. And our third learning target is I can summarize what I've learned about phonological and phonemic awareness and consider implications for my practice. So I'm hoping in the next 50 minutes, you can say that all of those things are true.
I don't know.
First, we're going to do a little bit of retrieval practice. So if you were here last time, you know I talked a little bit about, we've got a lot of research on the science of learning. So not just the science of reading, but the science of learning. And one thing that we've learned is that retrieval practice, asking people to recall things that we want them to know, helps make it sticky. That's really good for our students and our developing readers. It's also good for us as adult learners. So this is a bit of retrieval practice from our first session. And because I'm a fan of explicit instruction, I gave you a word bank. So what I want you to do is look at those definitions. We did some terminology defining in session 1. And just think in your head, or if you want to jot it down, you can. Pull the words from the word bank and match them with their definition. I'm going to give you about 1 minute here to do this on your own, and then you'll get some feedback from me. Take 10 more seconds. Okay, so we know that affirmative and corrective feedback is an essential part of explicit instruction. So here comes your feedback. If you matched the smallest unit in spoken language or a sound as a phoneme, good job. The awareness of individual phonemes within spoken words, if you said phonemic awareness, great work. The awareness of the sound structure of language, that's phonological awareness. The written representation of a phoneme, or a fancy way to say a letter, is a grapheme. And the knowledge of those relationships between phonemes and graphemes, between sounds and letters, the ability to use that knowledge to read unknown words, that's phonics. And I know the next session in the series is about phonics, so we'll talk a little bit about it today, but not too much. One more piece of retrieval practice here. We talked about last time, what is the road from phonemic awareness to proficient reading? Sometimes it can be really hard to think about when we hear a fluent reader. What does all this phonemic awareness stuff have to do with that? What's the roadmap? And we really talked about 3 sort of levels that developing readers go through. So I'm going to give you a moment to think about, what do they really need to work on kind of first, and then what's the next skill they start to acquire, and then what's that 3rd level when we have true automaticity and fluency. I'll give you a moment to think about that. Take 10 more seconds. So if you were thinking about level 1 really as being kind of those letter sounds and mastering those relationships between phonemes and graphemes, or sometimes we hear about sound symbol correspondence or sound symbol relationship, that's all talking about teaching our students that this little squiggly line is a representation of this sound that's in their oral language. Once they start to learn those relationships between letters and sounds, they can start to use that to sound out new words. But to sound out new words, they have to be able to blend, right? So that's really where that phonemic awareness starts to come in. And to spell unknown words, they have to be able to segment. They have to be able to separate words into sounds. So this is really to get from that level 2 to that level 3. They can't do it without phonemic and phonological awareness. And then ultimately, after students have decoded and decoded and decoded, they engage in a process that we call orthographic mapping, right? That's where students are storing those words for automatic, efficient retrieval so that they don't have to sound them out anymore. So phonemic and phonological awareness really plays a critical role in getting our students to fluency and automaticity. So think about how you did on our retrieval practice. And I am going to give you this little celebration because I'm sure you all did great. Great job on the retrieval practice. Let's jump into some new content. And really, again, we're going to spend the bulk of our new content today talking about when you see EBI out there in the world, or when I use it, it's evidence-based instruction or sometimes evidence-based interventions. So it's really talking about, what is the instruction when we look at the science of reading? What are those practices that we have evidence, actual studies, peer-reviewed studies to say that this is effective? This is effective on a large scale for students. So everything we're going to be talking about today in terms of instruction is evidence-based. It comes from the science of reading on building phonological and phonemic awareness. The way we'll approach this conversation is we'll start with the forest. So we're not going to talk about specific instructional strategies to start. What we're going to talk about is what's true generally. What do we know from the research generally about building phonological and phonemic awareness? And from there, we'll zoom in and talk about the trees, and we'll look at some very specific instructional practices. But there are lots and lots and lots of ways to build phonological and phonemic awareness. I'm only going to show you a few ways today. So it's more important that you know the forest. What should be true no matter which of the specific strategies we're using for instruction. I also just want to point out, and I hope this isn't too in the weeds, you'll notice that the language I'm using is building phonemic and phonological awareness, not teaching phonemic and phonological awareness. It's a small difference, but phonemic and phonological awareness is a cognitive skill that students develop over time. So it's not so much something that we directly teach. What we do is set up activities for students to practice, and we give them a lot of corrective feedback. So that's why you hear me say strategies for building rather than strategies for teaching. So as we start with this forest view and think about what should be true about our instruction, the way that we build phonological and phonemic awareness, we're going to go back to the National Reading Panel report. So we talked about the National Reading Panel the last time we met, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with it outside of our conversations as well. This was when Congress in the late 1990s said, hey, kids aren't like our reading rates aren't great here. Reading researchers, go out there and look at all of the research and tell us, write a summary for us. What does the research say about how reading develops and how we should be teaching it in schools? And they came out with the National Reading Panel report was the result of that work. And a lot of what we still know to be true, even though that report is 24 years old now, a lot of what we still know to be true about effective phonological and phonemic awareness work in our classrooms comes from the National Reading Panel report. So we'll start there, and then I'm going to add a couple things that we've learned since that time. So the big thing was from the National Reading Panel report that kids have to develop phonemic awareness to become proficient readers. Every proficient reader has phonological and phonemic awareness. So that was a big finding. Really that was kind of coming about in the 90s, but there used to be a time when we didn't know that. We didn't know how important phonemic and phonological awareness was. In addition to kind of that big question, it answered some really important questions about how we can most effectively build phonological and phonemic awareness skills. So one of the questions that the National Reading Panel report answered was what specific skills should be taught? There's a lot under that umbrella, right? So when we look at the research, what types of skills most often end up leading to reduced risk for reading failure, right? And so I'm going to talk through these and I'm going to give you an example of each one of them. And then we'll circle back to some of these when we look at practices later on. The first three are kind of related. Identification, isolation, and categorization. Those all have to do with kind of individual phoneme level work. So I'll give you some examples where you can see, I think, how they're similar, but how they're a little bit different. So an example of an identification task would be if I ask students, which word starts with the D sound? Dog, cat, or ball? So they're identifying in which one of those words they hear that specific sound I gave them. Isolation would be, what's the first sound you hear in dog? So similar, but now they're isolating it, right? That's a little bit more of a complex skill. Versus categorization, if I said, which words have the ah sound in the middle, and then gave them several words. So those three skills are related, but a little bit different. Blending is asking our students to blend phonemes together into a word. So for example, if I said, listen readers, I'm going to say the sounds in a word, you blend them together. Listen, man, blend. And my students said, man, that's a blending task. Segmenting is the opposite. It's when students take a word and segment it into the individual phonemes. So for example, if I said, readers say man, and they would say man, and I would say sound man, and they would say that's a segmentation task. And then finally, deletion is a type of manipulation skill. So an example of a deletion skill would be if I said, all right, readers, say dog, dog. Now say dog without saying d, and they would say og. So this is what came out of the National Reading Panel report in terms of the most important phonemic awareness skills for students to develop. And if you think back to our conversation last time, and even some things I said earlier today, and probably some things you just know, which of this list, which skills are the most predictive of reading and writing proficiency, and which are the most relevant for beginning readers and writers? I'm going to give you a hint. There's two of them, and I'm going to give you a moment to think about it while I take a sip of water.
Could you please repeat the question? I'm
Yeah,
trying to absorb.
Yeah, yes. Thank you for advocating for yourself, Denise. I appreciate you. So out of this list, there's two of these that we've learned are the most predictive of later reading proficiency and are the most sort of essential for our beginning reading and readers and writers to develop. And, oh, sorry, puppy's here biting my toe. If you said blending and segmenting, congratulations. And if you said something else, congratulations for trying as well. But it's blending and segmenting. And if we go back to thinking about that progression from phonemic awareness to proficient reading that we talked about earlier, it makes a lot of sense because really when we're getting kids from that sort of sound by sound, I know my letter sounds, but I need to start blending words and reading words. They can't do that if they can't blend. And they can't spell if they can't segment. So really those blending and segmenting skills they're important for two reasons. One, they're really predictive. So they're the measures that if a student isn't able to blend or segment CVC words by the end of kindergarten, they're at high risk for reading failure. They're very predictive skills. They're also really important. They're really important that we build those skills. It's more important than rhyming. It's more important than syllable deletion. Those are really the most important skills for, by early first grade for students to have mastered. And we're going to talk about progressions a little bit more in just a moment. The other thing that the NRP told us is that phonemic awareness instruction is most effective when we focus on 1 to 2 skills at a time. So that means like in a single lesson. And they found that once a lesson hit 3 or more PA skills, the effect sizes were reduced. So really focusing on, in a single lesson, 1 to 2 skills is what's most effective. I'm pausing for dramatic effect there. Okay. So another question that was answered by the National Reading Panel report are, what are the features of effective phonemic awareness instruction? What's true about effective phonemic awareness instruction? And the first thing that was really important, and you'll probably hear about this again when you hear about phonics from Rachel, is a systematic approach. And so what that means, it means a couple things. One, it means that we're moving from less complex skills to more complex skills. So for example, it is a less complex skill for students to identify the first sound in a CVC word than it is to identify the medial sound in a CVC word. So that's part of systematic, is that we're moving from less complex to more complex. And it also means that we have a scope and sequence. So we're not teaching things willy-nilly. A counterexample to think about that I think helps make this clear is have been historically some instructional approaches where the approach to phonics was just, if a kid struggles, you teach that word. Versus a systematic approach is, we teach these things in this order. And once students have mastered things, this is the next thing that we're going to. So we know from the National Reading Panel that our phonemic awareness instruction does need to be systematic, but the caution that I want to give you there is it's not necessarily linear. Phonemic awareness is not like every kid is going to master this and then every kid is going to master this. And the thing that I think is really important, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this today, phonics instruction should not be withheld until students have mastered phonemic awareness. I think we used to think that phonemic awareness was a precursor to phonics when there's really a lot of overlap there. And even as our students are still working on developing phonemic awareness, phonics is actually going to support that. So we don't want to hold off on our phonics instruction just because our kids haven't mastered the phonemic awareness skills yet. The next piece and I see the chat box lighting up, so I'm going to finish this part and then I'm going to see, Jackie, if there's things we should talk about right now. So the next feature of phonemic awareness instruction is really that it should be explicit. And so if you're familiar with Dr. Anita Archer's work, you know there's actually 16 principles of explicit instruction. But when I think about phonemic awareness instruction, I think what's most important is that we have really clear explanations, that we do teacher modeling, that students have many opportunities to practice. So I like to call these at-bats. This is how many times in a single phonemic awareness lesson do my students get an opportunity to practice. And what that means for us instructionally is two things. One is I have to watch my teacher talk, because the more time I spend talking, the less time my students spend working, right? So explicit phonemic awareness and phonics instruction has really minimal teacher talk. The other thing is choral response. So if I'm asking for a choral response rather than a popcorn response, all of my students are getting more at bats. So those are the kinds of things we want to think about when we think about explicit instruction and opportunities to practice. And then the other piece that's really big is corrective feedback. So it's really important that our students get corrective and affirmative feedback when they're practicing phonemic awareness and phonics, because we want to make sure that they're practicing accurately and they don't develop misconceptions. So when we talk about age appropriate, and then I'll see if there are things in the chat that we should respond to. So the National Reading Panel also says that phonemic awareness instruction should be age appropriate, but what does that mean? So really, for my pre-K friends out there, it's a lot of playing with rhyme. So even though we know that rhyming is not the most important skill, it's going to be the on-ramp for those skills that students are starting to work on in kindergarten. So if you were here last time, we watched the roly-poly nursery rhymes, right? And starting to just kind of play with rhyme, play with sound. That's the best thing that we can do for our students in that pre-K setting. In kindergarten, we really want to start those identification and categorization skills. And we blending and segmenting at the CVC level. If we can get all of our kids leaving kindergarten, at least blending and segmenting too would be amazing, CVC, we're in a really, really good spot. Then in first grade, we're going to keep working on those blending and segmenting skills, but getting with more complex, like words that have 4 or 5 phonemes. And what that means typically is that they'll have a consonant blend, and that's trickier. So that's, again, that systematic, moving from CVC to 4 or 5 phonemes, consonant blends. And we're starting to work on more complex skills like deletion and manipulation in first grade. And if I have any if I have any second or third grade teachers out there, you might be wondering, why don't I see second or third grade on there? And that's typically because for core instruction, we're not really doing isolated phonemic awareness work in second or third grade anymore, which isn't to say our students aren't still developing those skills, but that work is really happening through our phonics instruction. Intervention is different. Oftentimes we will have students in intervention in second, third, eighth grade who are still working on developing phonemic awareness and phonological awareness skills. Jackie, is there anything in the chat box that I should speak to before I continue on?
I took the opportunity while you're talking about that to just note that that means those of you, and I used Hegarty as an example, but you do not have to do the entire lesson every day, especially if you are in preschool or kindergarten. It's too much and it's not necessary. And then somebody noticed that was good to know, because it seems like it's just a lot.
Yeah, we're actually going to talk about recommended time in just a minute.
Yeah.
So you teed me up perfectly for that, Jackie.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. So speaking of, it's like I asked whoever put that in the chat to ask, but how much phonemic awareness instruction and practice should we provide? The National Reading Panel looked at that as well. And what they found was the most effective programs were 20 hours or less per year. And in fact, what they found out is not only were programs with more, and I'm going to tell you what that translates to like daily in a minute, but they found not only were longer programs not more effective, they were actually less effective. So after 20 hours, the effect sizes started to dip. And 20 hours ends up being about 10 to 15, I'm so sorry, friends, ends up being about 10 to 15 minutes a day.
Look, let's get, you talk them through.
So what that shakes out to in kindergarten and pre-K, about 10 to 15 minutes a day. In first grade, about 10 minutes a day during the first part of the school year. And then about mid-first grade, we're shifting to a lot of that work is going to happen through our phonics instruction. So I keep saying that, and you're probably wondering, like, what does she mean through our phonics instruction? So if you've been watching kind of the blogs and the reading nerds out there having some arguments in the blogosphere in the last few years, you know there's been a lot of conversation about, is there value in auditory only phonemic awareness work, or should we really be doing all of our phonemic awareness work with letters? And I think the debate is still happening out there, but my read on all the research I've read is once students have those phoneme grapheme relationships, and once they're starting to do a lot of that decoding work, we really should be shifting to our phonemic awareness work is happening through our phonics instruction and through our encoding instruction. I'm going to show you some examples of that a little bit later. But just as a quick example, you know, if I'm having my students work on a phonic decoding where they're sounding out a CVC word and then blending it, and I give them the word man, for example, and they say, man, man, while they're looking at the letters, that's a decoding skill. It's a phonemic awareness skill. They're blending those sounds, right? So again, pre-K, early kinder friends, no, because they don't have enough of that yet. But as we start to move to kind of late kinder, first grade, really we're shifting a lot of that work to happen through our phonics instruction. So another question, so those were kind of the big findings from the NRP that have held, that are settled science. Those are still true. Since that time, we haven't found any research to negate any of those things. There are a couple of additional pieces or things that have come out in the research since the National Reading Panel that I think are worth mentioning. One is around manipulatives. And I will say, you know, the research on multisensory instruction is not actually as strong as a lot of people think that it is, but there is some research to suggest that manipulatives during phonemic awareness tasks can be effective. And I will tell you, just in my personal practice, having worked with a lot of students with reading disabilities, I have found this helpful for my kids who struggle with phonemic awareness because it's a really abstract task, and those manipulatives can make it more concrete. So I think that is, I don't think every kid needs manipulatives to develop phonemic awareness. I think it's a good idea for our kids who struggle to make that abstract task more complete. And the other thing that we've learned that's really important is about something that's called, sometimes you'll hear it called continuous blending or continual phonation. And so we have several studies that have shown that continuous blending, and I'm going to show you what it is in just a minute, is more effective than segmented phonation. So for example, if I'm teaching my students to blend, or if I'm modeling blending, I'm going to say, listen, I'll give you an example from the start. All right, readers, I'm going to say the sounds in the word, you blend them together. Listen, man, blend. That's continual phonation versus, notice the difference here. This is segmented phonation. Listen, readers, I'm going to say the words, the sounds in a word, you blend them together. Listen, blend. And it's just a real stretch to go from that to man. I'm setting up students for a lot more success when I say man. And the other thing that we're doing is we're priming students when they get to the phonics work. That's how we teach them that they're going to sound out words. So if you've ever had a kid who you're reading with and they look at a word and they say and then they look at you and say frog, that's a student who really needs that continuous blending, right? If we can teach them that they use that continuous blending when they're decoding, they're going to make that jump to blending and decoding much more easily. So that was kind of our forest, the things that should generally be true about phonemic awareness instruction. Y'all know me, I love a little retrieval practice. So I'm going to give you a chance here to kind of make sticky some of those big ideas. So my first question for you is the two most essential phonemic awareness skills for students to master in support of decoding and encoding are, I want you to think about those, what those two skills were. I'll give you about 10 seconds. Did you say blending and segmenting? I bet you did. Here's a little Snoopy yay for you. Nice job, friends. What about, we'll do a couple more. Phonemic awareness instruction should be both blank, which means that it progresses from less to more complex skills, and blank, meaning that it includes teacher modeling, lots of practice, and corrective feedback. What are those two characteristics? Did you say systematic and explicit? Yay, there's some cheering penguins for you. Nice work, friends. All right, one more. Once students know letter sounds and have, that should say, begun decoding, most of their phonemic awareness development can take place via what type of instruction and practice? Phonics? Nice job, a dancing penguin. And if you got all of those, here's a happy dance, Snoopy. All right, let's zoom in now. That was the forest, kind of generally what should be true about phonemic awareness instruction. And we're going to zoom into the trees now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to model 4 different phonemic awareness, phonological and phonemic awareness tasks for you. I'm going to model a phoneme isolation task, a blending and segmenting task, an encoding task, and word chains. I want to emphasize that there are lots and lots and lots of ways to build phonological and phonemic awareness. So I'm in no way saying these 4 ways are the only way to do it. I more want to model. What I want you to look for is, where do you see explicit instruction? Do you see some examples of phonological awareness through encoding or phonics and encoding? Manipulatives, where do you see continual phonation? So this is more, the point of this is more to give you examples of all of the things we just talked about. And I'll give you a little preview right now. When we're done, you're going to go into breakout rooms and chat about what you noticed and kind of what's coming up for you today. So feel free to take notes if you would like to. Normally, friends, I like to stop screen sharing when I model and just do it with actual things. But I thought for a group this size, it might be better to do it digitally. So hopefully this works out okay. You can let me know. All right, so this is an example of a phoneme isolation task. All right, readers, I want you to listen carefully. What's the first sound you hear in book? And you all can respond with your sound off. The first sound we hear in book is B. Readers, this is a ball. What's the first sound you hear in ball? The first sound in ball is B. Readers, this is a hat. What's the first sound you hear in hat? Readers, this is a dog. What's the first sound you hear in dog? D. Listen, readers, ball, hat, dog. Which word has the same first sound as book? Ball, hat, or dog? Ball has the first sound, same first sound as book. Book starts with B. Ball starts with B. There's an example of a phoneme isolation task. I'll give you a chance if you're capturing any notes before I show you the next one. All right, let's do some blending and segmenting. And I'm going to use my arrow here. Hopefully you can see it. All right, readers, I'm going to say the sounds in the word. You blend them together. Listen. D, aw, dog. Blend. Readers, say dog. Sound dog. I'm just trusting that you all are responding. And here's an example of how I might use manipulatives here for segmentation. Readers, say dog, sound dog, and what we're going to pretend here is you would be the one pushing up a little bit, a marker on your own paper with the sound lines. So sound dog. Okay. Now I'm going to show you an example of an encoding task here. All right, spellers, our first word is a sound out word, and our first word is Man. That man is my dad. Man. Spellers say man. Sound man. First sound. Write the spelling for Spellers say man. Sound man. First sound. Next sound. Write the spelling for ah. Spellers say man. Sound man. First sound. Next sound. Last sound. Write the spelling for n. Spellers, what word did you write? First sound. Next sound. Last sound. Check your work. Does yours look like mine? Okay, one more. I'm going to show you word chaining. So here's an example of a word chaining activity. Readers, sound this word. Man. Readers, change n to t. What's my new word? Let's sound and read. Readers, change ah to I. What's my new word? Sound and read. So that's an example of a word chaining activity. Now, again, friends, these are by no means the only way to teach these skills. What I want you to think about now, and I'm going to go all the way back. Hopefully I'm not giving anyone a... where did you see examples of explicit phonemic awareness and phonological awareness work? Where did you see some examples of us doing that through phonics and encoding? Manipulation? Where did you see that continual phonation? So those things that we know should be generally true about our instruction. And so where we're gonna go next, I think the fastest way for me to do this is just gonna be to click through again, so I apologize for that. Bear with me. There's our little manipulatives. Is I wanna give you some time now to chat about what you learned today, what's resonating in smaller groups. So in just a minute, Jackie's going to open the breakout rooms and really take this conversation in whatever direction is most helpful for you. I think we'll do about 5 minutes, Jackie, but just some questions to get you started. And I'll drop these in the chat before we go into breakout so you have them there. Is just, what did you notice about that instruction? What are some of your generally key takeaways from today's conversation, or maybe even our part 1 conversation? And how do you imagine this might impact your teaching or your coaching if you're a coach, or your leadership if you're a leader? So those are some questions to get you started. Again, before we go over there, Jackie, I'll just copy and paste these in the chat box real quick, and then you'll have access to them in your small groups. Here they are in chat. Give me one moment. All right. I think that, Jackie, we're probably ready for breakout rooms whenever you are. Happy chatting, everyone. We'll see you back here in about 5 minutes. Do you want me to pause the recording for this, Jackie? Start the Got about 20 seconds, friends, and then everybody will be back here. All right, I think we're all back. Do a quick check of your mic. You unmute it in the breakout, and then it stays unmuted when you come back. So welcome back, everyone. We've got a few minutes before we need to start closing out our session at the top of the hour. So I'd love to just make a little bit of space for any questions that might have come up or even highlights from your conversation. So you can use the chat box if you'd prefer. You can just take yourself off mute. But we've got a few minutes where we can have some whole group conversation here. I make good use of wait time because I used to be a special educator. It's also okay if it's, 4:50 the day after the election and we're all real tired and don't want to have any whole group conversation. I think that I will take us back to our slide deck and start kind of closing out, but the chat box is still open. So if something is coming up and you just didn't have quite enough time to get it out, park it in the chat box and I'll have Jackie keep an eye on it for me. Give me just 1 second here to redo my presentation for you all. Get into full screen and share all the steps here. Here we go. So to close out, I wanted to share with you, I believe everybody got a note from Jackie about this, but after our last session, we decided to add another session. So if you weren't there for part 1, or if you were, you could just recall, we did a little bit of practice where we were practicing not so much the teaching, but just kind of those language structures. So we were practicing like counting phonemes in words and correct pronunciation of phonemes. And if that wasn't an area of strength for you, don't feel badly. I think I shared some research last session that it's many teachers are not being prepared in their pre-service or in-service training with that information. And so there was a request in the feedback form from our first session to can we just have a session where we just do a bunch of practice and do some skill building on the kinds of things we need to know as educators? So you asked and we answered. We did add a session. It'll be at the same time, but just note it's not a Wednesday, it's a Monday. So on Monday, November 18th, we'll have an hour together where we're really just going to be doing kind of teacher knowledge building around really phonemes, a lot of phoneme work. So hope to catch you there if you can make it. I want to just reiterate our learning targets. Remember at the top of the session, I was saying I was hopeful that you'd be able to say, I can summarize the research describing evidence-based instruction for building phonological and phonemic awareness, that you could observe some instructional routines and think about their alignment with the evidence-based instruction, and that you'd have a chance to summarize what you've learned and think about the implications for your own practice. Jackie, I did see a couple things come up in chat. Anything we should speak to there?
It looks like someone is asking about Astor. Has anyone used Astor? A-S-T-O-R.
I am not familiar with that one.
Sounds like her son used it and he's almost 50, so it could be one of those probably great programs that did not stand the test of time as far as people learning how to use it.
Yeah, I'm glad that question got asked, because I will take a moment just to kind of share. I think there are so many high quality instructional materials out there now, especially for foundational skills. So especially for phoneme, grapheme relationships, phonics. And I think we get really caught up in what's the best program. And we're just at a place now where there's a lot of them. There's a lot of really good programs. And so it's more important for us to know what should be true about our instruction than what specific program we should use, because then we can evaluate programs, right? And the reason I think that's so important is I think, I hear us getting trapped in this, well, Orton Gillingham is the only only way to teach kids with dyslexia, and it's not true. Structured literacy is the way to teach kids with dyslexia, and Orton Gillingham is an example of one structured literacy program. So that's why I spent that time on the forest. What I really want you to know is what should be true regardless if I'm using Haggerty or Collaborative Classroom or whatever, because there's a lot of good programs out there, and you don't necessarily need to be spending a bunch of your very limited resources buying new programs if you've got one that already works, or you want to have the tools to know if you have one that doesn't work or that you need to supplement. So thanks for asking that question.
I have dropped links in the chat for the feedback form and for the flyer with the information and link for our additional session. And you don't have to sign up for that. Just go to that link on that day. And Genevieve and I will be there.
Thank you. I will say for that one, I'm going to have you guys like actually practice things in breakout rooms. So be ready to do some practice if you join us for that.
Should they bring any manipulatives like some cubes or anything like that?
Nope. Well, as you all are filling that out, I want to thank you so much for your time. You've been such a fun group to work with over these last couple sessions. I'm glad we got to add another one. You've got my contact information in the session guide, so reach out anytime. If you have a question or you need a thought partner, I'm always happy to help a Montana educator. And then I do want to just give a shout out for one particular resource in the resources for continued learning. I'm just going to unblur my background so that you can see this, and I'm going to pull it off my shelf. It's called 7 Mighty Moves. It came out last year. It's a very brief, easy read. It is it was written by an actual first grade classroom teacher. She's in the classroom right now teaching. She's got pictures in here, resources. It is a super teacher friendly resource, and it's evidence-based. And it's really on all the foundational. So phonemic awareness, teaching letters, phonics, etc. So if you're feeling pretty new to this is probably my #1 recommendation for a teacher who's really just kind of learning about reading instruction that's aligned with the science of reading. And then the only other thing I'll show you is the cute puppy because he's right here.
Oh. Good news, Kimberly and I are planning to do a book study with that book.
Oh,
this
awesome.
month.
Lindsay will probably come to it. Lindsay, the author, is like awesome about coming to book study. So
Oh, wonderful.
I'll out to her and ask her if she'll come. I bet she will.
So we're going to plan to just keep our every other Wednesdays unless the group would like to do it at a different time, which is understandable in the summer. We're planning on doing a book study with you guys for that.
Yay. I might have to hop in and join.
Yeah. And if anybody on is in a school who is offering our home-based program, the Waterford, just so you know, we have a Zoom meeting next Tuesday. If you want to join, we'll be talking about how to get parents to get their kids actually registered. We'll be giving some information about how to enter your kids in Infinite Campus about that. And there will be representatives from Waterford to ask questions. So if you or someone else in your school really needs that information, get a hold of Kim and I, and we'll make sure you have an invitation to that Zoom meeting. 4 o'clock on the 12th, 3:30, I'm sorry, 3:30 on the 12th. Has everybody gotten the feedback form that needed it? It's in the chat. And I can do it again.
Genevieve, it looks like we have a question in the chat. Sherry's asking, so what is the right amount of sight words to teach kindergarten?
Oh man, is there a sight word session, Jackie?
There is not yet, but we can sure add one.
That's, yeah, I would say that's probably a whole session. My short answer is going to be, ideally, you've got an HQIM, a high quality instructional materials resource that's got a good scope and sequence for your high frequency words. And that's what you're going to teach. That's my very vague short answer, but maybe we'll add there's a whole lot to talk about with high frequency words.
We've had requests for a sight word teaching routine, which sometimes you'll hear them called red words or heart words. In fact, they're all high frequency words, but the way that you teach them is important. And we have read requests for that and to do a session on building and using a sound wall. And so what may happen is we may have a straight month of class every Wednesday in order to fit those in, because I know they're important things to be able to reflect on over the summer so that you can come back strong. And so we have this long list. We also remember that OPI puts on a summer institute in Bozeman every summer, and we're pushing hard to get some of this stuff into some good sessions there. And hopefully they will all end up on the same day, but not at the same time. So if you only wanted to come for one day, that you would be able to do that. So just be on the lookout for the information as it comes out. And I see some folks are heading out. I want to do sessions on sight words, sound walls, and Bow Valley. Okay.
Good stuff. Eager learners. I love it.
There is for not it, and it's not, well, in my opinion, it's not a very expensive training. I think for about $100, you can take a sound walls training with 95% group. And it's really good. It's from one of the kind of OG authors in that work. So just to know that it's out there. If it takes us a while, you can get some learning there. And there's a person on YouTube. I'll look it up and put it in our resources. She does great, how to and lesson examples for sound walls. And Genevieve, there's some questions in there just for you.
I saw that. I wasn't sure if the question was how long the reading block should be in kindergarten. 60 minutes in kindergarten and 90 minutes starting in first grade.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what the research has found.
That doesn't mean that kids have to sit at their desk
No, please.
for 60 minutes.
And that's all of your reading instruction. That's not foundational skills instruction. So that's our phonemic awareness, our phonics, and then all of our upper strand of the rope work. So our interactive read alouds, where we're building vocabulary and syntactical awareness and background knowledge and small group rotations. That's your entire ELA block. Well, reading block, not writing.
Writing gets another 30 minutes. That's what I say.
Correct.
$15 and $15 if you must. We got 25 feedback responses. Good. All right, those of you leaving, thanks for coming. Have a great night.
All right, if there